80,000 downloads.
You what?
I know. It's wild, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And as ever, we cannot take it in because as many of you have listened already and given us so much lovely feedback, we talked about imposter syndrome last time. So yes, thank you very much. Still just sliding right off our backs this end.
I know. It was a good episode though. I'm glad we did that one. That's probably the thing I struggle with the most. Imposter syndrome, identity, figuring out who I am and all the rest of it. So like being honest and upfront has helped me.
That's fantastic.
Getting that episode done and getting it out there. It's just like, right, well now I can just start living a little bit more authentically.
100%. And also, yeah, we're trying. We see our imposter syndrome. We are trying to celebrate the wins a bit more.
Yes.
When there's time. But this week, we have a very, very, very special guest. We were so excited to be approached and introduced to this wonderful lady, Jenny Okolo. So Jenny, let me read a little bit here. Occupational therapist and essay founder. Jenny is a recent TEDx speaker. Hurts a little bit. Who sits within the mental health and wellbeing space and is also a lead psychiatric occupational therapist working within the NHS. She has made it her mission to educate and encourage others as explored through social activism. Jenny's area of expertise is neurodiversity, and we just absolutely loved speaking to Jenny.
Yeah.
And
hello from the other side.
Oh, God.
She's our first non-ADHDer. So like it's somebody from the other side that's giving
neurotypical NHS lady.
Yeah.
And we've joined forces to bring you this lovely chat. Like obviously there's things sort of on reflection, there are things I wish I'd said, as you do.
Yeah.
So we don't necessarily agree with everything because we're looking at it from two different angles. But the point being, that's what we need to do to make progress is to understand it from both sides. And the main point is we do very much agree with her message of compassion.
Yeah.
And that is incredible. That's what we're always banging on about. And it was just so, so wonderful to speak to Jenny and to understand it from the other side. And yeah, she's just an absolute ledge. I wish we could talk to her every week.
Well, we can't, but here she is.
Enjoy. Thank you, Jenny.
ADHD as females, ADHD AF, ADHD as females, the podcast.
Hi, I'm Dawn.
Hi, I'm Laura, and
we are
ADHD
AF.
AF. Seriously. We are two neurodivergent neighbours who moved to the same street at the same time, at the same age, with the same undiagnosed disability. What are the chances?
Since discovering the enormous impact ADHD has had on our lives and the horrifying numbers of missing undiagnosed females, it has become our mission to make some serious noise.
We want to use our voices to raise awareness, break the stigma, and share our experiences in the hope that they help others.
So join us for a chat, or as it's called up here in Aberdeen, a blether.
Trigger warning, we will be covering some really sensitive topics, so please do have a read of the description of each episode before listening.
It's important to note that we are not medical professionals, we're not therapists or coaches, we're not qualified to offer advice or support. What we will do is share our experiences alongside resources and information from professionals. We will talk over each other and we will go off topic and forget the point mid-sentence.
We are both assigned female at birth, which means that we can only speak from the experience of life as AFAB people. However, ADHD AF is an inclusive space. Whatever your gender, you are very welcome here.
Yes, you are.
ADHD as females, ADHD AF.
Jenny, thank you so much for coming to speak to us.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Not at all. So will you tell our listeners your name and age and a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jenny Okolo. I am 26 years old, soon to be 27 actually.
Swap places.
Oh gosh. And by trade, I'm an occupational therapist. I specifically specialize in mental health. Occupational therapists, there's always this thing about, what do we do? We're not occupational health, but rather we work mainly in clinical settings, supporting people with gaining back their independence. That's in a physical setting, maybe somebody who's had an accident, supporting them in getting back to their daily activities, or in mental health as well. Again, if somebody has been diagnosed with a mental health condition, we support them in that sense. So I've been qualified for about 5 years now. I started quite early, and I went straight into mental health, specifically forensic mental health, which basically means that I work with people who have various mental health conditions, but also on top of that have a criminal background as well. So that means liaising a lot with Ministry of Justice, probation, sometimes prisons as well, which is where I was working too. So again, it's quite challenging, but I always like a challenge, and I think it's great that healthcare, mental health specifically, is able to integrate really well in criminal justice too. So that's basically what I do as my profession. And then on the side as well, I say on the side, but it's becoming like part of what I do on a almost weekly basis, is doing sort of wellbeing workshops, speaking on podcasts like this, and promoting the role of occupational therapy, or just my role as a health professional. And more recently now, and I think it's because I've kind of gone into a setting, which is the prison setting, where there's a lot of neurodivergent clients that I work with. So again, just being able to bring a different perspective on that, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Absolutely. Well, congratulations on your TED Talk. That's super exciting. When did that happen? I'm just going to move this because I'm worried it's closer to me, and I'm always shouting anyway. So.
So when did it feels like such a long I don't know, when did it happen? Oh, in June. Was it June or July?
June of this year.
No, that's not true. It was in August.
Lies.
Oh my goodness. You know what? I think the build up towards, when I was doing, when I did the TEDx, so it was like a couple of months beforehand, and just afterwards, it just seems like such a blur.
I bet.
But that was just an amazing experience. It was, something I always sort of dreamt of doing a TED Talk, but I never knew I would do it within the NHS. So, it was really great. And again, my topic was on neurodiversity and empathy as well. So
that's amazing. We tried to watch it and we couldn't find it, but that's probably because I'm just being like rubbish at technology. But we saw a bit, and you were talking about it was like you'd said about mental health or something. So it sort of cut in, and then you said, keep your hand up if you would still speak to them if they'd been to prison, or something along those lines. And we were like, we like this girl.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it should be out like I think end of the month or beginning of October. They do all this editing stuff before they put up on YouTube. So definitely share that. But I wanted the introduction to be mirrored in terms of like what real life is like. Yes, put your hand up if you believe you have empathy, and most people do believe they have empathy. But of course, when you put it into context of what I was talking about, having empathy towards somebody who's committed a crime, but then also might have a neurodevelopmental disorder, it kind of plays in with your sort of, most people, their moral compass in terms of, yes, I do have that empathy, but then on the other hand, this person's committed a crime. So I wanted to sort of gauge and get the audience to sort of think about that as well, because that's what I think about on a daily basis.
Yeah. That's fantastic. That's so interesting. I tried to get a TEDx, didn't I? I tried to get one here in Aberdeen, and they turned me down, and I was devoed.
No,
you were very close.
I was close, but they said I didn't make the final cut. But I think it's quite interesting, like, because when I looked at who was speaking this time, I'm going off piece because I always do. There was a girl who had it, who did get picked, who was autistic. And I wondered if it was just a bit like they'd sort of tick the neurodivergent box. I think that's sort of my fear, is like with the idea that a lot of us, a lot of people that are in prison, or people that are on the streets, or teenage mothers, or all of this, and being neurodivergent, being ADHD, potentially more specifically, if we're kind of like the dangerous people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think this time what they wanted to do, from what, speaking to the curators, they, when I put in my application, I think it was quite sort of unique in a sense of, like I said, I was talking about empathy, but then also given a different perspective in the context of criminal activity, context of, just how the media portrays certain people, and just the potential path that one can go through if they are not diagnosed on time, if they are misdiagnosed. I spoke a lot about me as a clinician. When I get referrals, there's a lot of query ADHD, query LD. There's nothing really concrete in place, or you don't get anything. And when I meet, my particular patient, I'm like, well, they are displaying some of the traits, but unfortunately, because this wasn't picked up in their younger years, there are no reports. There are no, all these things that would, create that formulation for formal diagnosis isn't there. So it's really difficult. So that's sort of what I wanted to highlight. And I think this TED talk was not necessarily about, solving problems, all that kind of stuff, but more about highlighting the issues, especially in sort of unique but still common areas as well, that other people can relate to, whether you are, if you do have a neurodevelopmental condition, or if you're a clinician on the other side, or if you're just sort of interested in this sort of field and wanting to know more about it.
That's fantastic. Were you going to say something?
Well, no, I was just going to say it kind of leads us into where we're going with the questions, and what are some of the signs that you see that could cause you to suspect that a patient has ADHD?
So really, these are the more common signs that you would see in terms of like determining whether somebody should be referred or not. So, fidgeting a lot, not being able to concentrate in any of our sessions. So I do a lot of group work and activities, whether that's on a one-to-one or within a group. And, if they're not able to sort of sustain or still, just be in that whole session, doesn't, I don't sort of base it on, oh, this person's fidgeting, they must have ADHD. No, it's definitely, in context of, other areas, what other clinicians have observed. If I am able to get collateral information from previous mental health services or, family and things like that, concentration levels. So we do a lot of cognitive assessments, which are, based on, for us, occupational therapists, activities of daily living. So whether they're able to follow through tasks, I might get them to, cook a simple meal with a couple of instructions. And if they're not able to sort of stay on track and they're just finding it really difficult. A lot of the time, actually, I do get service users who actually come up to me and say, oh, miss, I think I might have ADHD. And they start listing out their own symptoms. I'm like, oh, wow, kind of, it's almost not that they've done the job for me, but they've kind of, the fact that they're able to highlight and identify the areas that they're struggling in, I think it's really good. But then it's sad at the same time, because it's, it's things that they know that they are struggling with, but for whatever reason, they've not been able to access that help and support. So, and then you have like the quote unquote, not so obvious symptoms and traits. And those are mostly associated with those who might be high functioning. They look like they're
good at masking.
Good at masking, basically. And they look like they're thriving. But again, because they're having to mask some of their symptoms, they're struggling internally. And it can only last so much until they sort of combust. So there's a combination of, traits, and it's difficult. ADHD especially is quite difficult to diagnose, because there are a lot of factors to consider, whether that's psychology, sociology, just your overall holistic person that you're sort of trying to assess. So it is quite difficult. And I do understand, why it takes so long to get a diagnosis. But I think it's just, from what I found on the other side, it's such a long journey. Like, even if I did refer somebody, like the assessments that I have to do, the assessments that maybe my speech and language therapist colleague has to do, depending on, what their symptoms are. There's so many hoops to go through, especially in adulthood. It's really difficult. But those are some of the symptoms.
what I think the first thing that came to my mind then was like, we're always talking about comorbidities, right? So, for example, alcoholism, addiction, eating disorders, OCD, you name them. Like, do you think that there's any way, because that's one of the things that we think about is like, is there no way that if somebody was coming forward with a mental health problem, and obviously I am specifically asking you this because I'm interested, so it is like from your perspective, like if somebody comes in and says that they have an eating disorder or addiction or whatever, do you think it would be reasonable to potentially consider that mental health problem could potentially just be a comorbidity of being neurodivergent, of having ADHD, and that in itself could potentially warrant screening somebody for ADHD? Because that's what we feel. We've both been misdiagnosed or it's gone unnoticed or not the root cause. So the depression that I had was because of the ADHD, and the bulimia that I suffered was, it's very common in women with ADHD and things like that. And I've spent my life being treated for those things, whereas actually it turns out they're comorbidities of ADHD. And so I think that's one of our hopes is like, could you just see it? Anyone that's coming in with mental health problems, potentially that could be a sign,
Yeah. I think, again, coming from the clinician's point of view, or from my point of view, I would say it's difficult because, like I said, it's ADHD, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, there's so many traits, so many symptoms. And unfortunately, it's very difficult to sort of assess just by one or two, symptoms that somebody might be presenting to actually say, oh, this requires screening for an ADHD assessment. And hence why the route that it goes, normally somebody from a mental health team will have to do a screening, could be an OT, could be a nurse, and then they have to refer to a psychiatrist to then do the formal diagnostic testing. So there's so many hoops that one has to go through. So I think that the key thing though is what I would be looking at is just how consistent is it and how is it impacting
how severely
everyday living, right? This person comes to me once or twice and I might not automatically think it's ADHD or it's LD or it's anything. I'll still sort of try and formulate who this person is, what is it that they're struggling with. However, if it becomes a more consistent thing, then I might start sort of branching out into, okay, let's look into this area. Do they fit the criteria for condition? And at the end of the day, all I can do as a clinician, because I'm not a psychiatrist, is screen. I can only screen and collate as much information as I can, and then refer onto the psychiatrist if needed. Now, because ADHD especially is presented in so many different ways, like I said, you've got the lower functioning and more higher functioning, especially for those who are higher functioning, who may be masking their symptoms. And sometimes people mask their symptoms, they don't even know that they're masking it. Because
100%.
Most of my life.
All of my life,
So if they don't even know that they're masking their symptoms, sometimes it's difficult for, the clinician to even know that they're masking it, right? So with things like this, it takes a while and it takes a lot of, I think, groundwork to try and understand, again, is it consistent? Is it debilitating in this person's life? And I think it sort of goes both ways in terms of, is that person able to articulate what their traits are? And I think that sort of leads back into education. And I can say even some of my friends who have just, in their late 20s or sometimes even 30s have been diagnosed at a later stage. Well, I didn't have the language for it.
No.
I didn't know how to tell my, my doctor or my nurse that this is what I was struggling with, So I think there's so many different parts of the puzzle that's sort of like floating in the air that for some reason we're not able to link it up together, because unfortunately, mental health conditions, they're much harder to diagnose than physical health conditions where it's just presented right in front of you. I think in an ideal world, yes, if we had a list, and it would be a long list because again, there's just so many, if we had a list and we could be like, okay, yeah, this person's presenting.
Tick, tick, tick.
It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that they have it, but at least it warrants
Yeah.
some sort of assessment.
Yeah.
That's how it would be in my ideal work. But unfortunately, it is quite difficult to.
Oh God, completely. I mean, with it being, you can only do your bit, it has to go to this person, has to go to, how the system works. I think that's the thing that's hardest, is if you've got people, like you said, that can identify, that can say this is, or even, can prove, people that do have school reports or whatever else, it being so long, like, do you think, in an ideal world, if you could wave a magic wand, is there any way that it could not be a psychiatrist, of which there are not that many and the access to is so hard? Do you think that it is plausible in any way that we could have a different system, that it could work differently, or it has to be?
I think, possibly, in terms of, the reason why, let's say the GP might refer you to an ADHD specialist, because they're specialists in that area.
Yeah.
I guess the great thing is, let's say for myself, like as an occupational therapist, you get lots of training. So for example, I'm doing the sensory integration training, which again can support either initial assessment or collateral information for somebody who's being referred for an ADHD assessment. So I think what could sort of like speed up the process, but also allow more health professionals access to be more involved in that process, so that there's less delay, is offering training, specialist training in these conditions to people like myself, who are capable, if we've got an interest in it, more than capable of being trained up and doing that groundwork, so that there's enough information to speed it up and go to the specialist or the psychiatrist. Because at the moment, again, the waiting times are ridiculous. Like if you go to the NHS way, and most people, like the friends I just mentioned, they done it privately.
Yeah, exactly.
And they have to pay a lot of money for that, which isn't fair.
No.
So the services are existent, but it's such a long waiting list, and not enough clinical staff are trained in this area.
Because it's such a shame, isn't it? Because it's both a privilege and a postcode lottery.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, a lot of assessments are being done for, younger children. So those like in primary school, nursery, even secondary school time. So I think that's where most of the assessments are, or most of the focus, I would say, is going to.
That's good though, isn't it?
And adults with ADHD are often sort of misdiagnosed or ignored, for example. So even though I would say that, I'll sort of caveat from that. So even though there is more focus in the younger years, there is still such a drought of assessments that are happening. And again, because it's such a specialist sort of assessment to do. And also, when, if you're looking at children, for example, a lot of them can be hyperactive, they start playing, and a lot of this can be missed along the way, unless, I don't know, you mentioned, it's a postcode lottery, unless, someone, a teacher or someone who's sort of well educated in that, able to speak on that and be like, oh, actually, let's discuss that. And I would even say that, especially, I would say amongst the Black and ethnic minority groups, that's even much harder, because again, certain behaviors, whether that's, being very hyperactive, might be misinterpreted as being aggressive. And again, that's what I spoke about in my TED talk around, having empathy for those who are in the criminal justice system. A lot of my guys that I work with, yes, they've committed a crime, but they've always sort of had behavioral problems, even in school, but it wasn't picked up as anything but clinical. It was just sort of behavioral, or this person's that kind of stuff.
Had they got that help, they might not be where they are.
Absolutely.
Exactly. And unfortunately, even if you do get the diagnosis at adult age, a lot of this sort of learned behavior, or behavior that is developed through masking in your own way, sometimes it's hard to undo that at
completely. And the weight of what you're carrying, like even this idea of like, carrying around, dragging the horse around, like, I'm an awful person, I'm rubbish, I'm not going to do a good job, or I'm a failure. Like,
Yeah.
even when you go, oh, thank God for that, actually, I was trying and it wasn't my fault, those things. How do you still undo all of that? You know, it's like
Exactly.
reshaping your whole identity and way that you view yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably why, like, it's quote unquote easier when you're diagnosed and you're, given the treatment at a younger age.
Yeah.
Because, like you said, you've just got so many different areas. Like, you've got people who, are in work and they've struggled so much with maybe, keeping to deadlines. And then all of a sudden, yes, they've got the diagnosis they understand what's happening. But it's like, well, how do I continue then? Like, how, it's also that sort of, I don't know if it's resentment or anger.
All of the above. Yeah.
And, towards the system, maybe towards themselves in a way, like, of had I known earlier,
Yeah.
maybe my life might have been different. Maybe I might not have blamed myself more, those type of things. So it's just the pathway at the moment is not great, I will say.
Yeah.
It's not great in a sense of, we know that there's thousands of people who are undiagnosed, who don't even know that they have it, who are struggling. And there's even more people, if not the same, who do know or have an inkling that they might have it, who might self-diagnose themselves. But for whatever reasons, whether that's to do with finances, long waiting lists, not having access, aren't able to get the right resources and assessment done. And oftentimes, especially like, in workplaces, which I think has to change just because of how difficult it is to get a diagnosis.
Yeah.
Oftentimes I hear that they rely on getting an official report to say, oh, yeah, you do have ADHD. Well, it's very difficult to get that.
You're not going to be able to get that. Or can you wait 6 years?
Yeah.
I do understand that, even from I guess there's sort of pockets of, difficulties from the service user side, and then also from the clinician side, where we're seeing the problem. But I guess, like I mentioned before, having more training in these specialist areas, I think, will definitely help close the gaps a little bit more.
And I guess that's it as well, is, we talk about it a lot. It's just like, like a blanket understanding. We were speaking to somebody earlier that was like, oh, maybe it isn't real and blah, 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 blah. And, it's that whole idea of like, if we could just have it not be so opinion based in terms of just its existence. Like, of course, each individual case is going to have to be judged, but like, in terms of like whether ADHD is real, like, surely that just needs to go away. Like, that's enough of that.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you probably noticed, I said it's a neurodevelopmental condition.
Yeah.
So I make sure, because in my eyes, it's a clinical condition.
Yeah.
It's not just, oh, I've got ADHD. It's just, no, it's actually a clinical condition, the same way schizophrenia is a clinical condition. So I make sure, especially when I'm, talking to people about it, that I ensure people understand that learning disability, or, all these, different neurodiverse conditions are neurodevelopmental. It's to do with the brain. It's something that, it can't be helped. Like, treat it as you would any other condition. And I think
with compassion, exactly. Compassion and empathy, like you say.
Absolutely. And like you rightly said, like, I think that will definitely, the more people know that will definitely sort of solidify the seriousness of it. And I can't believe I'm even saying it, because it's a condition, but a lot of people don't take it serious. They sort of think, oh, well, you can get over it, or you're just being lazy, or all these different stereotypes.
Do you know what? It's funny, because you just reminded me, like, when I first sort of found out about it, like, looking into it, and oh my gosh, I think that sounds like me. I remember being relieved in an instant, and then in the next one I was like, oh God, why does it have to be something that's debatable, that I have to fight for people, that some people are just going to not believe it exists, full stop? Like, why does it have to be that one? Because that's hard enough to take, to then be like, there are people out there who think that it's a joke. It's awful. And if we did have that blanket understanding, like you say, in places, in workplaces, with enough people understanding about it, the compassion is there. And then even to have that compassion, the knock-on effect on people's mental health is enormous, because people aren't going to be so ashamed or carrying all this weight and masking that they get so depressed in the first place. Like, even just that understanding would make such a difference.
Yeah, Absolutely.
Yeah.
I more education around it, and less belittling people
Yeah.
just because it's not visible, or because it doesn't fit a certain description of what you would classify as a clinical condition.
Yeah.
So, and I think even whilst I was in training, I'll be honest, I was quite confused about what is
Yeah.
ADHD. The classic traits that you think about is, somebody who's hyper, somebody who's like blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But then obviously during my training, because I had the privilege of being taught what it actually is in a clinical
Yes.
setting, it made me understand, that actually, first of all, there's different traits, and also like, you can be on different ends of the spectrum and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the way it's presented to the public, to just people in general, has to be, in my opinion, come from a more clinical perspective.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
From my opinion. So, and I think that would definitely, help people understand that, yes, again, like you said, it's, it's something that people deal with at different stages. And also, like, it will help people who have been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed for such a long period of time, especially in the adulthood, not feel so ashamed, and not feel so like, I don't want to bother anyone. Is there any point of me getting this? At any point, if you've got something, you've got something. And treatment, whether that's through, some people have medication, some people have talking therapy, like it depends. You should have access to it. You should have the option, I think.
What are some of the biggest challenges for people dealing with late diagnosis?
I think the mental health impact, low self-esteem. I meet with a lot of, my population is mainly guys. I work with male in a male prison, who are like, there's no point. Even if I did have it, like, what's the point? I can't do this, I can't do that. The quality of life is very poor, I think, for a lot of people, especially if, in context of maybe not having a good support network, maybe not being able to get the job that they want, being in the criminal justice system. I think it definitely has a negative knock-on effect on how they view themselves as a person. And then also, I think, like I already said, even if they did get the diagnosis, a lot of people deal with that sort of resentment of, oh, well, how do I undo all these behaviors, or all these ways that I've been, masking, just to try and, cope with the pressures of just being a neurodivergent in the workplace, society in general, And I think as well, like, it's almost like feeling like the forgotten ones. And again, these are just sort of quotes that I get from the people that I work with. Like, they feel like the forgotten ones, like, okay, I have this, but does it mean that it's not a serious condition because I've not been, diagnosed in time? And especially for women, I would say, who they have a higher proportion of people who aren't diagnosed or who are misdiagnosed, again, because of, how society views, even young girls, I would say, in terms of the list of traits that they have for ADHD. Sometimes, women might not fit that particular criteria because of how they present. So I think it's very challenging, I would say, and it can definitely impact people in just their daily activities of life, work, family, friendships.
In all aspects, across the board, because also, like you say, if self-worth is knocked, then that's you. That's what you're putting out into the world, isn't it? So can I just go back? So I just thought it was really interesting. You were saying, like, a lot of the people that you work with are men.
Yes.
And obviously we've got this whole idea about, the stereotype being boys. And so just because I didn't know if I missed that, but, like, do you feel that even though they were boys, the people that you're working with, it was missed in because of race? Is that what you think is the contributing factor? Because if it is naughty little boys, and that's what we're all saying, and they were naughty little boys, then why? No,
absolutely. And I think it's not a one size fits all. Like, yes, you will get some people who are, some children, I would say, who, yes, they are naughty when they're younger, and it just comes with the age. But the reason why I said that is because there is, and even research shows that there's a high proportion of individuals, especially in the criminal justice system, who have neurodevelopmental conditions such as, LD, ADHD, and so forth, who haven't had the diagnosis. And even when you look at some of the traits and the symptoms that they might have presented when they were younger, so let's say, being hyperactive and then being, labeled as destructive and, aggressive. And even if you look at some of, let's say, the clients that I have, which maybe are young offenders, we get from 18 upwards, who, clearly there are, yes, behavioral problems, but then we've had to refer a lot of people for, ADOS assessment. So it's part of the autism spectrum disorder diagnostic process. And again, to the outside world, they are deemed as sort of being aggressive, but there is more to it. And I would say, in the same way as somebody who might have schizophrenia, they might present in a more aggressive way or in a more, passive way, whichever way it is. So it's not to say that those who present in a certain way might, it's down to race or not, but it definitely contributes. If there is, a fact, in the same way that, like I said, women are less likely to be diagnosed. It doesn't mean that's the whole reason, but it plays a part, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So from your perspective, what changes for people after diagnosis?
Definitely, improved functioning. A lot of people have said that they're, able to, I don't know, just functioning, even as simple as responding to messages, or being able to, work well, or I would say even in terms of employees being very understanding of what their needs are to make certain adaptations, and just the overall self-esteem as well. I would say definitely does improve.
Do you think it lends to more empathy and compassion towards, especially people that are, in the criminal justice system? Do you think it leads them to be more understanding when they find out that someone's had this late diagnosis?
Absolutely. At the moment, it's not a major factor. I'm just thinking in terms of like court processes before they come over to us. It's definitely something that's being considered in court. I would say in my current prison, we've actually hired a neurodiversity lead. Now, this is huge, I would say, in terms of, because they're able to sort of recognize that, hey, we have a huge proportion of people who might be, misdiagnosed, undiagnosed, or diagnosed. And it's affecting how they're able to function even in the prison environment. So I think it's really great and it's positive that institutions like the prison, schools and whatnot are putting more focus on areas like this and supporting people who have different needs, and especially ADHD. So I think worldwide, or I'll say worldwide, but at least in the places that I've worked in, there's definitely more empathy, I can never say that word, emphasis on ensuring that we, make our services that we're providing as inclusive as possible. And, even like we started working on a sensory room, communication packs, and this is within the prison. And usually, the general perspective of a prison isn't that great because of how the media portrays it, but the work that's being done inside, I think is absolutely, it's great now. Like there have been issues and there have been sort of challenges in terms of us as clinicians getting across our message and trying to change up the regime, because it is a sort of old-fashioned way of working for a lot of them. But again, I think because they're able to see that, providing resources for this client group can also reduce crime, it can reduce the risk even within the prison. It can definitely help the way that the regime is run. It's definitely helped, I think, especially the officers, just have more empathy towards the people that they're working with, have more empathy towards the situation. And it's not to say that the crime that was committed isn't wrong, or, and that kind of stuff, but it's more about understanding the person as a whole and having that holistic point of view. And I think if we were all to have that sort of same viewpoint in terms of just having more empathy, just wanting to understand, we definitely go a long way with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's the point, isn't it? It's like rehabilitation, and like, you know, how is somebody gonna, you know, learn, I'm trying to find the right words, which I don't have, but like, you know, be able to change, to not that's what's the word?
Reoffend.
I couldn't find the word.
Yes.
How is somebody going to get to that place if they're not supported enough to be able to change and to learn and to grow? And also with regards to self-worth, like, it's like you say, like, what is it worth? Like, why would you bother? You know, and unless you are supported in some ways and there is empathy for you, then why would you? You know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I remember I was working with a young boy, 18 years old, so he was in adult prison, and you know, he has ADHD, he has a stutter as well, and I worked alongside with the speech and language therapist to create a communication pack with his consent. So he consented for us to share that with the wing officers that he was on, because what tended to happen, I think it's the word, was that he would get into lots of altercations with the officers. And he would sort of be pacing up and down. He would keep going like this.
Like punching his own hand.
That's aggressive. That seems
that looks aggressive. But actually, we're able to sort of talk to him and, you know, try and figure out what is going on. And, you know, we're able to sort of understand that he does this to get the words out.
That's his frustration.
Right? It's his frustration, right? So we put that inside a communication pack. We put that, you know, yes, he might sort of stand up and sort of walk up and down, but it's not necessarily because he's angry, but he's just
trying to communicate.
Trying to communicate. And the more that, you know, sort of put all these restrictive actions in place, it gets him all worked up. So we shared that with the wing officers, and again, they were quite shocked because they thought, oh wow, we just thought he just didn't want to listen. Or, you know, he was just like the rest. And, you know, that sort of toxic mentality that a lot of them have. And I thought that was just such a great piece of work because, again, it just sort of showed the bridge between us as clinicians and the prison service, or, you know, just, you know, to support that person in need.
It's just
honestly,
incredible.
I've got goosies. That's phenomenal.
Incredible what a little bit of understanding can do.
Completely.
Like,
because you know, it's reframing. It really does reframe everything. It really does. Because if you're coming in, I mean, we are all different, you know, whatever kind of brain you have, we're not all looking at things the same way, and there are always going to be miscommunications. But if you can actually like frame that and give those guards, like you said, a different lens to view those actions, changes everything. It completely changes everything.
Yeah, and like, you know, we're hearing some, you know, when we get referrals, we're hearing some of, you know, the non-clinicians, so let's say the officer or even governors saying, oh, I think this person might need a functional assessment or, you know, a communication pack. Whether they're using it in the wrong context or not, I'm just grateful that they're actually okay, something is happening here, and we need you guys as help.
That's
so I think that's great. So it's a positive. That's
really
absolutely
positive.
So if you could implement change in the diagnosis process, what would it be?
Definitely offer more training to all clinicians, just given that as an option. To train up in a specialist field, so that again that can sort of close the gap of you know how people get their diagnosis, especially in an initial screening process. I think a lot of health professionals are more than capable of doing a screening process in that aspect. As you know, for example, occupational therapists like myself, you know, if you were to do a sensory assessment, you have to be trained in that. So why not for an ADHD specific assessment? And I think that can definitely help, again, like I said, close the gap and also inform other clinicians, because as much as, you know, ADHD might be, you know, taught in certain modules and things, it's still a specialist field. So, and I think a lot of health professionals still aren't really clued up on what ADHD specifically is, and, you know, what is the functions of it, and, you know, the different traits and treatments and things like that. So I think there's a lot of gap in knowledge, which, you know, I think has definitely contributed hugely to why a lot of people aren't receiving a diagnosis or being referred. So I would say that is the main thing. And then I would also say, in terms of education and just providing that literacy for people who are experiencing or might feel that they are experiencing certain traits, how to be able to articulate that in a way to their health provider, to their GP, and not feeling sort of scared, and sort of coming to them with like confidence, you know, in what they're saying. So, and I think as well, like, especially not just clinicians, but like teachers, for example, or workplace or friends or whoever, just having that knowledge, that educational knowledge of what that condition is, so that they can support people, also that other people can support them as well as much as they can.
I think that's it. You know, we talk a lot with the boys at ADHD Adult UK, the charity, and one of the stats they give is 1 in 40 adults has ADHD, and in which case, like, we all know people, you know, we're all, you know, this is everywhere. This isn't a small thing. It's a really, really big thing. And the different ways that it impacts, it really lends to what you're talking about with this empathy, is that, you know, the people that you are judging for always being late, for forgetting your birthday, all these little tiny things, that person who you think, oh, you know, they're a bit of a no-hoper or a waste of space, or, you know, whatever you're thinking about that person. With looking at those numbers, it's highly likely that those people, you know.
And it just means being more compassionate. It doesn't mean like, you know, you've got to diagnose and say, oh yeah, I think you might have ADHD. No. Not doing that, but it's just more about having compassion about the possibilities that this just might not be their fault.
Exactly.
Just as simple as that. It just might not be their fault. And if you create that safe space for that person and yourself, if you feel like it's the right space to do so, then yes, you could sort of suggest and you could discuss if they're open to talk about some of their struggles and things like that, and sort of open up that conversation. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, so tell us some positives. So positive sides of ADHD, if you feel there are any.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think so, especially in terms of problem solving. We've got a lot of people, again, who are just so superb at that. Like, they're just able to problem solve, able to sort of like, you know, whether it's multitasking or doing so many things at the same time. I think ADHD as well, in terms of like communicating, and, you know, some people, they're able to sort of, you know, talk to people and just be very more free with that. I think it can definitely have different positive outcomes of, of ADHD. I think it sort of depends on, again, having that safe space. I would say that's what makes it a positive experience for the person. And if they're able to sort of be themselves, even if they do have ADHD, what I don't want, and what I tell people who have been diagnosed, or some of my clients, is it doesn't, just because you have the ADHD doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? So we can work on ways on how you can sort of function in society as much as you can, and have an independent sort of life, and partake in all the activities that are meaningful to you. But what it does depend on is having that space to do so. So, for example, I mentioned the workplace. There's so many initiatives that I've been seen flying around to support people who are neurodiverse, and they're able to do the job sometimes even better than other people, because they've been the environment has been created and has been adapted to suit their needs. So the same way I would say in friendships, in the same way I would say maybe in school, in prison, like what's happening now. So there's definitely positive outcomes that can come from just receiving that diagnosis, and just allowing that person to just be free, be themselves, without the fear of, oh, have I put my mask on or not? So
that's amazing. So as a health professional, you've spoken about approaching neurodivergent patients with empathy. What does that actually look like?
What that looks like is just not judging. So I spoke about in my talk, if you see somebody who's maybe acting out of the norm, or displaying some traits, like I mentioned before, instead of going with that initial thought, which sometimes can be sort of built because of how society is, maybe through social media and whatnot, just having that opportunity to just think about, okay, is this more than what meets the eye? if it's somebody's displaying in this way and if it's becoming a consistent thing, being more understanding, again, creating that safe space for the person to sort of open up to you and for you to ask questions that, might be helpful. And then especially like when you look in, my settings, when I look at criminals who've committed offences, again, like I said, taken away from the crime that has actually been committed, but actually the behaviours that maybe led up to that point. Mm-hmm. For me, when I look at a case study, I don't necessarily just look at the crime that has been committed. I also look at what was that person's social...
what are the environmental issues around them.
Looking at that person from a holistic point of view. And that has enabled me to sort of think of things from different perspectives. Yeah. And I can definitely say, again, when I was younger, I didn't have that. I had a very narrow view of what, for example, a criminal is like, they chose this life. Yeah. It's all their fault. For some people, yes, it might be. But in order not to generalize, I think you definitely have to have empathy. Not everybody's pathway is the same. How people present, it's totally depending on different factors. So empathy is just about wanting to understand, wanting to see their point of view, seeing another person's point of view apart from yours. And I think that can definitely open up and start conversations.
How lovely.
We love you, Jenny.
You're our first non-ADHD guest.
Typical guest.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, wow, nice. So you definitely got a different perspective then.
But it's so great to get a perspective from someone that isn't, doesn't identify as ADHD themselves. So it's been really nice speaking to you.
Yeah, we're so grateful for you coming on. We really appreciate it. Do you feel like you've said everything you want to say? Is there anything else that we might not have covered that you want to add, or anything you want to, add more to?
I think the main thing, and I think I've sort of mentioned it in different pockets, is that I definitely want to reiterate that ADHD is a neurodevelopmental condition, and I want people to, that's one of the takeaways, with empathy as well, for people to take away from that, because just from some of the feedback and even from speaking to my patients, they feel like there's no point of having this diagnosis. What does it do for them? Like it's not something that's being taken seriously. Mm-hmm. It is a serious condition in terms of like it's a clinical condition. So I definitely want, especially like those who have ADHD or those who are curious about it, or just those who are wanting to learn more, like it is a specialist area. And, like I said, I hope that more people are trained in this area so that, again, we can get more assessments out and things like that. But I think that was definitely one of the main things I wanted to highlight.
That's brilliant.
Amazing.
Thank you so much. I'm like, come back. Come on, everyone. But congrats again on your TEDx talk. That's so amazing, and just you're doing amazing things. So thank you so much.
And you guys as well. I think in terms of creating this, podcast and just specializing, especially in this area, I think is key, especially for those who again are wanting to find out more, those who are very curious and maybe think that they might have some traits. These are the sort of opportunities that I think a lot of adult people didn't have when they were a bit younger. So I think we're definitely carving out a great lane for you guys, and hopefully get more health professionals on here as well, so that again we can give different perspectives.
People are suffering on both sides, and systems are stretched and everything else, and that's always been so important to us, is we don't want to point the finger and say this is bad and people are doing this and that. It's like we need to come together and try and make things better for everyone.
Awareness, understanding, empathy, everything.
So money would be nice too, hey?
Yes, that would be good. That's coming. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, it's been so lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you, lovely. Have a nice evening.
You too. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye. How lovely is she?
She's so nice.
What a legend. And what amazing work she's doing. Mm-hmm. Really, really incredible. Fantastic. So thank you so much, Jenny. It was one of those, isn't it, where you have a conversation and then you reflect on it afterwards and you're like, oh, I wish I'd said this and I wish I'd said that. And it was very much, that was the case with me, because I think it was just like, as I've said in previous episodes, like my experience of getting diagnosed because of the privileged position I was in, having access to private healthcare through my husband, not through my own bloody merit, was like, it actually was a very quick process.
Yeah.
And it was actually a very easy process. And obviously that's not Jenny's experience. And we have to honour that as well. It's just that I have that lived experience. So I know that it doesn't need to be as complex. I feel that and I've experienced that. So it's difficult. And I think also, like when she mentioned people being more forthright and explaining their symptoms, I think on the one hand, you've got anxiety, people that can't advocate or speak up for themselves. And on the other, we know that loads of our listeners are totally clued up, are going and giving bloody bullet points and are not being believed.
Well, that's it.
And are being shunned. But again, you know, it's one of those, oh, I wish I'd said that moment. But I really love that interview, and I think she is a phenomenal and inspiring lady.
Yeah, she really is.
And it was really great. So thank you so much, Jenny.
And she's so young, so she's got so much ahead of her.
She's taking over the world for sure.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I look forward to it. Go on, Jenny. But yeah, thank you so much, and we hope you enjoyed that. And it's nice to have the opportunity to actually hear about it from the other side, isn't it?
And I think we're gonna look to speak to more people from the other side. If you know any doctors, psychiatrists, anybody that you know that might want to talk about this with us, then absolutely put them in touch with us. Send them our way, because we're still learning.
That's the thing, and it's got to be right. Is this compassion is key across the board for people on both sides, and particularly, you know, in the way that neurodivergent people are treated, but also like that's got to be the way forward, is getting our heads together. It has to be. Yeah. There are two things going on at the same time, and they need to be understood and able to figure out a kind of decent way forward.
Yeah. When people come together, things happen.
Absolutely.
So why not? Why not at all?
So, Dawn, what's the most ADHD thing you've done this week?
What is the most ADHD thing I've done this week? Well, I started back at uni this week.
Yes.
And I got up on Monday, jumped in the shower because I was running late, obviously, to get in for 10. And then text my mate who phoned me being like, why are you going in at this time? And then I was just like, well, I thought we were supposed to go in for 10. And she's like, oh, well, she's in a slightly different class from me. So she was like, oh, no, we're not until the afternoon. And I was like, oh, maybe I should double check my timetable. Double checked my timetable, and guess what? I'm not until the afternoon either. So yeah, I was a little bit too enthusiastic with getting ready, because I just had it in my head that I was supposed to be in for 10, and clearly I wasn't. So that's probably it for me.
Hey, but is it good to be back at uni? Are you happy to be back?
I am happy to be back, but we've not really done much this week. It's just been induction stuff, so we'll really get stuck in next week.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm excited.
That's really, really good.
Yeah.
I don't really even know what mine is. I feel like I've just been like some kind of ADHD mess all week. I basically haven't been sleeping well at all. No. So I don't know why that's come back. I shifted that a while ago. But yeah, it comes to bedtime and I'm just kind of wired and awake and thinking about things, and I should do this and I should do that, and then I wake up wide awake at like 5 a.m, and then I just think it's a cycle, isn't it? Because it gets worse and worse, because the less sleep you've had, the more of a zombie you are, and then you're doing less, and then you don't sleep, and it just goes on and on and on. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Not a very funny or exciting story, but I think it is the most ADHD thing that's been going on with me this week is sleep issues.
Boo.
Boo!
Don't like those.
No, we don't, but hey ho. But yeah, again, if you have enjoyed this episode, which we have, then we would really love it if you would, write us a review. That would be amazing.
Yeah. Share
it with somebody to give us some feedback on what you think. And we would really love you forever if you would make a donation to our Buy Me a Coffee page.
So it's buymeacoffee.com/ADHD as females. One coffee is the equivalent of £5, and you can buy us one, or you can buy us
200.
I was going to say 101, but why stop there?
And we really, really appreciate the donations, because we're working really hard behind the scenes to bring you some very, very exciting things. And you know what? All this kind of business, it costs money, doesn't it?
It really does.
But bear with us, it'll be worth it. And we really, really, really appreciate your donations, because we are working really hard.
Yes.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. And is that everything this week?
I think so.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
So, bye.
to say look after yourselves and each other, compassion. We haven't said self-inventory for a little while.
Yeah, that's true.
But yeah, thank you so much for your support. It's a lot at the moment, and we're sort of trying to figure out what's next for us, and
We're chipping away.
It's a lot, but there's good things coming, and we really, really, really appreciate your support. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Love you. Bye.
Bye, bye, bye.
ADHD as females, ADHD AF, ADHD as females, the podcast.